nature doesn't kill the unprepared nearly as often as it kills the certain. From a doctor who trusted her credentials over a ranger who'd done the trail 300 times, to a coach whose past success became a death sentence for her group, to a woman who arrived in the hottest place on earth in open-toe sandals, ready with a complaint. The Grand Canyon kills about 12 people every year, not from falls, not from flash floods, not from rattlesnakes, from the thing that kills the most confident people in the most spectacular ways, the absolute certainty that they already know everything they need to know. This is not a story about a canyon. It's a story about a particular kind of person who arrives at one of the most dangerous places on Earth and decides, before they've taken a single step down, that the rules were written for someone else. 5 of them. 5 different trails, 5 different flaws, 1 canyon that treated each of them with the same indifferent precision. By the end of this, you will understand something about the Grand Canyon that most tourists never learn, and something about human nature that's far more unsettling. Because the canyon didn't kill these people. Their certainty did, and the canyon was just there to collect. Hold that thought. Because the first story starts with a woman who should have known better than almost anyone. It's 4:47 a.m. on a July morning in 2019. The South Rim sits at 6,800 feet, and the air is still cool enough to make you believe the day is going to be forgiving. Bonnie Baxter, 47 years old, ER physician with 22 years of emergency medicine behind her, is lacing up her boots at the Bright Angel trailhead. She's fit. She's organized. She has, by any reasonable measure, more physiological knowledge in her head than most people who will ever hike this canyon. Her guide that morning is a man named Derek Solano, a canyon ranger with 11 years of corridor experience who has escorted more than 300 groups from rim to river and back. Derek has watched heat exhaustion arrive in people who looked absolutely fine 20 minutes before. He has carried people out on stretchers who said, I'm good," right up until they weren't. At the pre-hike briefing, Derek lays out the hydration protocol: 1 liter of water per hour, electrolyte tablets every 90 minutes, no exceptions. He specifically flags Bonnie's hydration hose, a standard reservoir system, and notes that the bite valve is showing wear. He offers a replacement. Bonnie declines. She's an ER doctor. She knows about dehydration. She's fine. What Bonnie doesn't know, what her medical degree never covered, is the specific, brutal arithmetic of the Grand Canyon in summer. The canyon is not a hospital. It does not care what your credentials say. The inner gorge routinely hits 110 degrees Fahrenheit by early afternoon. The rock radiates heat upward from below while the sun hammers down from above. You're cooking from both directions simultaneously. The Bright Angel corridor drops 4,380 feet over 9.5 miles to the Colorado River. Going down is easy, deceptively, dangerously easy. Going back up is when the canyon collects its debts. Derek noticed the hydration hose issue again at the 3-mile rest house, 2 hours into the descent. The valve was seeping, not dramatically, not in a way that would alarm a casual observer, but enough. He flagged it again. Bonnie said she'd monitor it. She didn't replace it. Here's where it gets quietly devastating. At the midpoint of the descent, another group member, a retired teacher named Sandra Okafor, began showing early signs of heat exhaustion, slightly confused, moving slowly, asking for water she'd already consumed. Bonnie had extra. Derek asked her to share. Bonnie refused, citing her own needs on the climb back up. She was rationing. An ER physician, rationing water in the desert, refusing to help a teammate in distress. The group reached the river. They rested. They began the climb out in the early afternoon, later than Derek had recommended, because Bonnie had wanted more time at the bottom. As they ascended, Derek watched Bonnie's pace slow. He watched her reach for her hydration hose more frequently, and then he noticed what she apparently hadn't. The hose had been leaking steadily for hours. Her reservoir, which should have held 3 liters for the climb out, was nearly empty. She had a full backup bottle in her pack, sealed, unopened. She never opened it. They found Bonnie Baxter seated on a boulder approximately 1.8 miles from the rim, in a patch of shade that offered no real protection from the ambient heat radiating off the canyon walls. She was confused. She could not answer simple questions. Her core temperature, when emergency responders reached her, was 104.7 degrees Fahrenheit. She died before they got her to the rim. The backup water bottle was found beside her, still sealed. She had the knowledge to survive. She had the equipment to survive. She had the training to recognize exactly what was happening to her body. And she had, in her final hours, the specific, particular certainty that she understood this situation better than the man who had walked it 300 times. The canyon doesn't grade on credentials, it grades on compliance with physics. Now here's what nobody talks about when they discuss these stories. The warnings are almost always documented, written down, time-stamped. There is almost always a paper trail that runs right up to the moment of death, a sequence of moments where someone said, "This is dangerous," and received in return a dismissal. Jolene Harwood's paper trail is 4 entries long. Jolene, 41, a real estate developer from Scottsdale, had signed up for a slot canyon canyoneering route, a technical descent requiring rappels through narrow sandstone passages. The kind of route where your equipment is not a suggestion, but a structural component of whether you live. She arrived at the gear check with a harness she had purchased online, gym grade, rated for climbing gym use, not rated for the load dynamics of a backcountry rappel. Warning 1, the guide, a woman named Cassie Tran, with 8 years of technical canyon experience, flagged the harness at the gear check and offered a rental replacement. Jolene declined. She had read the reviews. It was fine. Warning 2, a fellow canyoneer in the group, a structural engineer named Marcus Webb, looked at the belay loop on Jolene's harness and said, quietly but clearly, "That stitching looks compromised." He pointed to visible fraying on the loop, the single most load-bearing point on any rappel harness, the place where everything connects. Jolene thanked him and did not change anything. Warning 3, Cassie Tran flagged the fraying belay loop specifically, separately from the initial harness concern, and offered the replacement harness again. Jolene said she appreciated the caution, but she was comfortable with her gear. Warning 4, at the top of the first significant rappel before Jolene clipped in, a second guide named Tomas Reyes asked her directly if she wanted to swap harnesses before the descent. She said no. She went over the edge. The belay loop failed under load approximately 12 feet into the rappel. The failure was not gradual. Frayed material, under dynamic tension, does not negotiate. It decides, in a single instant, that it is done. Jolene Harwood fell. 4 warnings, 4 documented refusals. A paper trail so clear that the subsequent investigation took less than a day to establish what had happened. The canyon did not surprise Jolene. The canyon simply enforced the physics that 4 separate people had already explained to her. What is your experience with gear checks? Have you ever been in a situation where someone told you something was unsafe and you had to decide whether to trust them? There's a phrase that Grand Canyon Rangers use that doesn't appear in any official brochure. Down is optional, up is mandatory. It means that the decision to descend is yours. But the decision to ascend is made for you by your water supply, by the temperature, by the clock. You don't get to negotiate the climb out, you only get to prepare for it. Felicia Holt, 44, owned a yoga and wellness studio in Denver. She was, by any physical measure, in excellent shape. She had completed multiple high-altitude retreats, studied breathwork extensively, and believed genuinely, not cynically, that her body operated differently than most people's, that she had trained herself to need less. To do more with less water, less food, less rest. The Grand Canyon has heard this before. At the pre-hike briefing for her guided Bright Angel descent, Felicia asked the guide, a ranger named Patrick Ames, why the turnaround time for her group was earlier than what she'd seen posted for another group departing the same morning. Patrick explained that turnaround times are calculated based on group composition, pace, and the afternoon heat forecast, which that day projected inner gorge temperatures above 112 degrees by 1 p.m. Felicia asked if the turnaround was enforced or advisory. Patrick said it was the difference between getting out safely and not getting out. Felicia asked if guides had actually stopped people from continuing. Patrick said yes, she accepted this technically, but she had already made a decision that Patrick didn't know about. At the midpoint of the descent, a natural rest area with shade, Felicia had cached her backup water supply, left it there because she didn't want to carry the extra weight on the descent to the river, and she planned to pick it up on the way back. This is the kind of decision that makes perfect logical sense until it doesn't. The group reached the river. The turnaround time arrived. Patrick called it. Felicia Holt kept walking. She reached the river, spent 40 minutes there, and began climbing out alone, without the group, in the early afternoon. She passed her cached water at the midpoint rest area, and she was already in trouble by then, moving slowly, sweating less than she should have been, which is the sign that the body has stopped trying to cool itself because it's run out of resources to try with. She didn't stop at the cache. She kept going. They found her on the trail, 2.3 miles from the rim, at 3:17 p.m. Her core temperature was 106.1 degrees. Her backup water was sitting at the midpoint rest area, 1.4 miles below her, exactly where she'd left it. The breathwork didn't save her. The heat adaptation training didn't save her. The canyon does not grade on philosophy. It grades on water volume and time of day and the specific merciless physics of a human body trying to function at 112 degrees. What would you have done differently at that midpoint rest area? I'm genuinely curious. Drop it in the comments. Claudia Beverly is the story that doesn't look like the others from the outside. She didn't have faulty gear, she didn't lie on an application, she didn't ignore a physiological warning sign. She simply did what wealthy people sometimes do when they've paid a significant amount of money for something. She treated the transaction as a renegotiation of the terms. Claudia, 49, worked in wealth management in Chicago. She had booked a premium-tier guided Grand Canyon expedition, the kind with satellite communication, professional guides at a ratio of 1/3 hikers, pre-positioned water caches, and a carefully engineered schedule built around one non-negotiable constraint. The group had to begin the climb out no later than 6 a.m. to clear the inner gorge before peak heat. Claudia's guide, a woman named Renata Osei, with 9 years of canyon experience, had explained this at the pre-expedition briefing, at the trailhead, and again at camp the night before the climb out. The schedule was not flexible. The heat was not flexible. The canyon was not flexible. Claudia Beverly was, it turned out, also not flexible. She emerged for the 6 a.m. departure at 6:23 a.m., having decided she needed more time to prepare. The group waited. They departed at 6:31 a.m., 31 minutes behind schedule. Renata noted it, said nothing beyond what she'd already said. The first shade stop came at a natural overhang approximately 90 minutes into the climb. Renata allocated 10 minutes. Claudia wanted 20. The negotiation cost them 8 additional minutes. Renata documented it. The second stop, at the 3-mile rest house, was supposed to be a water refill and a 5-minute rest. It became 22 minutes because Claudia said her feet hurt and she needed to change her sock liners. Renata asked her to move. Claudia said she had paid for a premium experience and she expected it to be comfortable. By the time the group reached the section of trail that receives direct sun from approximately 11 a.m. onward, they were 2 hours and 37 minutes behind the schedule that had been engineered specifically to avoid being in that section of trail at that time. The temperature in the inner gorge was 109 degrees while climbing. Claudia Beverly collapsed at 11:44 a.m. The group could not evacuate her quickly. The trail at that point offers no fast exit. Renata called for emergency support. The group went into emergency bivouac in whatever shade they could find, which was minimal. Renata and her co-guide, a man named Joel Pacheco, stayed with Claudia and worked to cool her while waiting for helicopter support. Both of them suffered serious heat injuries in the process. Claudia Beverly died of heat stroke and exhaustion before the helicopter reached them. 2 support staff were hospitalized. The premium fee had not purchased a different version of physics. It had purchased the best possible guidance for navigating physics, guidance that Claudia had treated as a suggestion from people she was paying. The canyon does not have a premium tier. If you've been following these stories, you've noticed a pattern. Each of these women had a specific, identifiable flaw, not a character flaw in the moral sense, but a structural flaw in their relationship to expertise. Bonnie trusted credentials over experience. Jolene trusted a label over a warning. Felicia trusted a philosophy over physiology. Claudia trusted a transaction over a timetable. Rosyn Fletcher trusted a LIE. Rosyn, 43, was a corporate attorney from Atlanta who had applied for a guided backcountry expedition requiring documented hiking experience. The application asked for specifics, routes completed, distances, elevation gains, conditions encountered. Rosyn listed weekend hikes in Georgia state parks as serious backcountry experience. She described day hikes as multi-day expeditions. She was accepted. At the team meeting the night before the hike, the lead guide, a ranger named Calvin Marsh, asked each participant to briefly describe their most challenging previous hike. Most people gave specific answers. Rosyn gave vague ones. Calvin noted it. He didn't disqualify her, the application had been accepted, the paperwork was done, but he noted it. On the descent, the gaps in Rosyn's experience showed immediately. Her pacing was wrong, she moved fast on the easy sections and slowed dramatically on technical terrain, which is the opposite of efficient canyon travel. She didn't manage her water intake correctly. She didn't recognize the early signs of heat stress in herself because she'd never been in conditions remotely like this. Calvin flagged her pace at the 2-mile mark. He adjusted the group's rhythm to accommodate her. He gave her an electrolyte tablet and told her to drink. She complied, but she was already working 2 to 3 times harder than the rest of the group to cover the same ground. At the turnaround point, Rosyn was showing early symptoms of heat exhaustion, mild confusion, reduced coordination, and elevated heart rate. Calvin recommended she turn back immediately with a support guide. Rosyn refused. She had paid for this. She had taken time off work for this. She was not turning back. Calvin documented the refusal. He continued with the group, keeping Rosyn under close observation. The climb out began. Rosyn's body, which had been working at maximum capacity since the first mile, had nothing left for the ascent. The heat exhaustion progressed to exertional heat stroke, somewhere between the 3-mile rest house and the 2-mile mark. She stopped walking. She could not answer Calvin's questions clearly. She was sitting in the middle of the trail at 10:52 a.m. with a core temperature that, when measured by emergency responders, was 105.3 degrees. Calvin had identified the survivable window, the point at which turning back would have allowed Rosyn to descend to cooler temperatures and recover. That window had been at the turnaround point when he would have recommended exactly that. The refusal had closed it. If you've been in a situation where someone refused to listen to expert guidance despite clear warning signs, a guide, a doctor, a trainer, what did you do? Drop it in the comments. I read every one. 5 women, 5 trails, 5 different ways of being certain. Here's what the National Park Service data actually shows. The vast majority of Grand Canyon fatalities involve people who received warnings they dismissed. The canyon's rescue operations, which cost taxpayers an estimated $1.2 million annually, are overwhelmingly responding to situations that began with a specific documented moment of non-compliance. A ranger who said, "Turn back here," a guide who said, "Drink this now," a fellow hiker who said, "That doesn't look right." The canyon is not random, it's not capricious, it doesn't ambush people who are paying attention. It is, in fact, one of the most thoroughly warned environments on the planet. Signs at every trailhead, rangers stationed at rest houses, guides trained specifically to prevent exactly the deaths described in this video. And yet, The thing that connects Bonnie and Jolene and Felicia and Claudia and Rosyn isn't stubbornness exactly. It's something more specific. It's the belief that their particular form of expertise, medical, financial, spiritual, professional, transferred to this environment. That knowing things in one domain meant knowing things in this one. The canyon doesn't accept transfers. If you want to understand how to actually survive the Grand Canyon, the real protocols, the specific water volumes, the turnaround calculations that rangers actually use, subscribe. Not to support this channel, but to be part of the community of people who take these places seriously, who want to understand the real rules, not the comfortable ones. The Grand Canyon is 277 miles long, up to 18 miles wide, and over a mile deep. It has been forming for approximately 5 to 6 million years. It has watched civilizations rise and fall on its rim. It has outlasted everything that has ever tried to conquer it. It does not care about your credentials. It does not care about your fee. It does not care about your breathwork or your belay loop rating or the experience you listed on an application. It matters about water volume and core temperature and the specific, unforgiving arithmetic of a human body in extreme heat. Bonnie Baxter sat down on a boulder with a sealed water bottle beside her and didn't open it. That image, the sealed bottle, the unseeing eyes, the canyon walls rising indifferent and orange in the afternoon light, is the one that should follow you out of this video. Not because it's tragic, though it is, but because of what it means. She had everything she needed to survive, right there, beside her. The canyon didn't take it from her. Her certainty did. And the canyon, 5 to 6 million years old, 277 miles long, a mile deep, simply waited, as it always has, for the moment when certainty and physics finally met, and let physics have the last word. The desert floor in July reaches 115 degrees Fahrenheit before noon. The exposed granite of the lower switchbacks radiates heat like a stovetop. Every hour of delay is an hour you spend on that wall in progressively worse conditions. The last tram down from the mountain station runs at 9:45 in the evening. On July 14th, 2022, 4 women started climbing toward it. 3 of them never made it. This is not a story about bad luck. It is a story about a series of decisions that each seemed reasonable in the moment, and about how reasonable decisions, stacked in the wrong order, can become a death sentence on a mountain that has no mercy and no water. The Skyline Trail in Palm Springs, California, is one of the most brutal day hikes in North America. It does not advertise itself as dangerous. It does not need to. The math does that work quietly, patiently, while you are still in the parking lot. You gain 8,000 vertical feet in roughly 10 miles, climbing from the desert floor behind the Palm Springs Art Museum all the way to the San Jacinto Mountains, from cactus and sand to pine forest and snow, sometimes in a single morning. The locals call it Cactus to Clouds, and that name sounds beautiful until you understand what it actually means. You begin in a furnace and you climb into the sky on exposed granite with no shade, no water sources, and no way out except up. That last part is the trap, and it is the first open question this story raises. If the trail is so dangerous, why do people keep attempting it alone, without guides, without rescue plans? The answer is more unsettling than you would expect, and it starts with a woman named Dana Kessler. Dana was 47, an ultra-marathon coach from Palm Desert who had completed the Cactus to Clouds route twice before. She was the kind of person who knew the mountain, or believed she did, which on a trail like this amounts to the same thing until it doesn't. She organized the July 14th hike. She chose the group. She vouched for the pace. The 3 women she brought with her trusted her completely. Lourdes Okafor, 51, was a respiratory therapist from Riverside. She was the cautious one, the one who read trail advisories the night before, who packed an extra liter of water, who asked questions the others had stopped asking. She was also the one whose concerns would be overruled at the worst possible moment. Bev Stanton, 49, was 11 months out from a full knee replacement and had been training for this hike for months. She needed to prove something, to herself mostly, the way people do after their bodies have betrayed them. She was the slowest of the four, and she knew it, and she told herself it didn't matter. Camille Royce, 44, was a landscape painter from Idlewild who saw everything through the lens of light and color. She was quiet on the trail, always pausing to photograph the way the early sun caught the granite, always drifting slightly behind the others. In the lower switchbacks, that habit looked charming. Higher up, it would become something else entirely. The trail demands a 3 a.m. start, not as a suggestion, as a survival requirement. The desert floor in July reaches 115 degrees Fahrenheit before noon. The exposed granite of the lower switchbacks radiates heat like a stovetop. Every hour of delay is an hour you spend on that wall in progressively worse conditions. The mountain's geometry punishes the late. Dana's group signed the trailhead register and stepped off at 6:10 a.m. Already late. The sun already cresting the ridge to the east, already beginning its work on the rock. Dana told them the pace was fine. She said they'd be on the tram by early afternoon, easy. She had done this before. And the thing about Dana's confidence is that it wasn't arrogance exactly, it was experience, translated incorrectly. She had completed this trail twice in cooler conditions with earlier starts. She was mapping her past onto a different day, a different group, a different body. That translation error would cost everything. The first 2 hours are deceptive. You're moving in the relative cool of early morning, the desert floor still visible below. The scale of the climb not yet apparent. The trail is steep, but the air is breathable, and there's something intoxicating about the view. The city of Palm Springs laid out like a circuit board. The mountains on the far side of the valley still purple in the early light. Camille stopped 4 times to photograph it. Dana let her. There was time, she said, there wasn't. By 9 a.m., the lower switchbacks were a griddle. The 4 women were climbing through heat that pressed down from above and radiated up from the rock. Bev's knee had begun to speak to her in a language she recognized, not sharp pain, but a deep, grinding complaint that said the joint was working harder than it should. She said nothing. She kept climbing. The rescue box sits at roughly the halfway point of the trail's vertical gain. It's a metal container bolted to the rock face, stocked with emergency supplies, a radio, a first aid kit, a logbook. It is also the last point where rescue teams can reach you with any efficiency. Above the box, the terrain fractures into switchbacks and false ridge lines that make helicopter approaches complicated and ground rescues brutally slow. The rescue box is not a rest stop. It is a decision point, the last honest one you'll get. The 4 women reached it at 11 a.m., hours behind any safe schedule. The rock around them was roasting. The sky was a flat, merciless white. Lourdes pulled up the National Weather Service advisory on her phone. She still had a faint signal here, the last she'd have for hours. Heat advisory, in effect. Extreme danger. The advisory used the phrase life-threatening heat. She read it aloud. Then she said what it implied. They should call for help now while they were still findable, while the radio in the box still worked, while there was still a version of this story that ended with all 4 of them going home. Dana overruled her in under a minute. And here is where the story becomes genuinely tragic, because Dana wasn't entirely wrong. She pointed out what the trail's geometry had already established. Going back down the exposed wall in afternoon heat, with Bev's knee compromised and all of them partially depleted, was its own kind of death sentence. The only efficient exit was up to the tram station, to shade, to water, to a gondola that would carry them safely down. The trap had already closed. The only way out was through. So they climbed into the worst of it. Past the rescue box, the switchbacks tighten, the exposure increases. The pines that promise shade are visible above, tantalizingly close. But on this mountain, close is a lie. Those trees are still an hour away, maybe 2, and the air between you and them is a wall of heat you have to walk through. Bev's pace collapsed first. The knee and the heat and the empty second water bottle arrived at the same moment on the upper switchbacks, and her body simply stopped being able to do what she was asking of it. But here's what made this worse. No one had been assigned to watch Bev. No one had been assigned to watch Camille. The group had no protocol, no designated sweep, no check-in intervals, no plan for what happened when the slowest member fell behind. These are the things a guide provides, not just knowledge of the route, but structure. A system that functions even when individuals stop functioning. The group fractured in 3 directions. Dana pushed on alone toward the tram station. She understood correctly that reaching the mountain station was the only way to get a signal out and call for rescue. She climbed with that purpose, leaving the others behind, which was both the right decision and the decision that left 3 women alone on a mountain with no radio and no plan. Lord stayed with Bev. She found a boulder that cast a narrow shadow, settled Bev into it, soaked her own shirt with the last water she had, and pressed it against Bev's neck and wrists. She had been a respiratory therapist for 23 years. She knew exactly what was happening to Bev's body. She knew exactly what she needed and didn't have. And she stayed anyway, the cautious one, the one who read the warning aloud, the one who said turn back. She stayed and refused to leave. What does that tell you about Lord's Okafor? Camille's path is the one that haunts this story most. Somewhere on the upper trail, in the heat and the confusion that comes when your core temperature climbs past 104 degrees and your brain begins to misfire, Camille left the trail. She stepped off the marked path and began descending a dry drainage, a rocky gully that fell away from the mountain toward the desert floor. In her mind, apparently, this was a shortcut. The desert was visible from here, spread out below, and the drainage ran toward it like a road. It was not a road. It was a slot in the rock that ended in a dry fall, a dead end, a place the trail never entered and rescue teams rarely searched. No one saw her turn. At some point, the exact time is unclear, Dana Kessler reached the mountain station. She found a signal. She made She had done what a respiratory therapist does, which is fight for someone's breathing until there is nothing left to fight with. It wasn't enough. The mountain had already decided. The search for Camille took longer. She was found a mile down the side drainage, a mile below the trail, a mile off any mapped route, at the bottom of the shortcut to nowhere. The drainage ended at a 10-foot dry fall onto bare rock. the investigator's best reconstruction is that she reached the edge in a state of severe heat-induced confusion and either fell or sat down and did not get up. The desert floor she had been walking toward was still miles away. She never knew she wasn't going to reach it. Now here's what I want you to sit with. Camille was not reckless. She was not inexperienced in the outdoors. What happened to her was hyperthermia, a physiological state in which the brain loses the ability to make accurate assessments of reality. The shortcut that killed her felt to her neurons like the right call. Her body was trying to save her life with a brain that had already been compromised by the thing it was trying to escape. This is the thing about heat stroke that most people don't understand. It doesn't feel like dying. It feels like clarity. It feels like suddenly seeing the obvious solution that everyone else has missed. The drainage runs down. Down is toward the desert. The desert is safety. The logic is perfect, and the logic is lethal. What's your own experience with heat on a trail? Have you ever felt that strange, false clarity where everything seems suddenly simple? Drop it in the comments. I'm genuinely curious how many people have felt that and recognized it for what it was. The Riverside County Coroner's Office issued its rulings in the weeks that followed. Bev Stanton, heat stroke, found on the upper switchbacks. Camille Royce, heat stroke, found at the bottom of the drainage a mile from the trail. Lourdes Okafor, heat stroke, found beside Bev under the boulder, the shirt still in her hands. 3 rulings, 3 women, 1 trail, 1 decision point, where the story could have gone differently. Dana Kessler survived. She was airlifted from the mountain station in a state of severe heat stroke and spent 4 days in the ICU at Desert Regional Medical Center. She recovered physically. The neurological damage was more specific. Physicians described anterograde memory impairment, hippocampal in origin, the kind that leaves the past intact but makes the present slippery. Dana can describe the climb in precise detail. She can tell you exactly what the mountain looked like at every stage of the ascent. What she cannot reliably hold on to is the rescue, the call, what happened after she reached the station. Those hours exist for her only as a reconstruction, a story told to her by the people who pulled her off the mountain, by the dispatcher who stayed on the line, by the SAR teams who filed their reports. She has heard the account so many times that she knows it, but she doesn't remember it. There is a difference, and she is acutely aware of it. The one who reached the tram, the only one who got the signal out, the only one who can no longer be certain what happened next. Think about what this story is actually about. It isn't about the Skyline Trail specifically, though the Skyline is a particular kind of unforgiving. It's about the gap between experience and wisdom, the way past success can become a liability when conditions change. Dana had done this trail twice. That knowledge didn't protect her group. In some ways, it made things worse, because it gave her the confidence to overrule the one voice that was reading the situation correctly. Lourdes read the advisory aloud. She said the words. She named the danger. She was overruled by someone with more trail miles and less situational awareness in that specific moment. This happens on mountains, it happens in hospitals, it happens in boardrooms. The person with the most experience isn't always the person with the clearest view of what's actually happening right now. Here's a question worth sitting with. Have you ever been in a situation where you knew something was wrong, said so, and were overruled by someone with more authority or experience? What did you do? What do you wish you'd done? Leave that in the comments, because that dynamic, that moment where the cautious voice gets silenced, is at the center of almost every preventable disaster I've ever researched. The Skyline Trail is still open. Riverside County Search and Rescue responds to distress calls on it multiple times every summer. The trailhead register still shows signatures from people who sign in at 7, 8, 9 in the morning in July. The rescue box is still there at the halfway point. The radio inside it still works. The logbook still has blank pages. What would it take for someone standing at that box in the heat of late morning to make a different choice than Dana made? Not more courage. It takes courage to keep climbing. Not more experience. Dana had that. It would take the willingness to let the cautious voice win. To treat the warning as information rather than obstacle. To understand that the trail's geometry, the heat advisory, the empty water bottles, and the slowing pace are not problems to be solved by determination. They are the mountain telling you something true. One more question, and this one is personal. If you had been in that group standing at the rescue box at 11 a.m. with Lords reading that advisory aloud, what do you think you would have done? I'm not asking rhetorically. I think most of us, if we're honest, have more Dana in us than we'd like to admit. The confidence that past experience earns, the belief that we can push through, the quiet certainty that the cautious voice is being overcautious. Leave your honest answer in the comments. It matters. Interview. Dana Kessler gave one recorded interview about 8 months after the rescue. She was asked what she would do differently. She said she would have started at 3 a.m. She said she would have listened to Lords at the box. Then she paused, the kind of pause that has weight in it, and said she wasn't sure those changes would have been enough. She said the trail doesn't negotiate. She said that's the thing she keeps trying to remember and keeps losing. 4 women signed the trailhead register at 6:10 a.m. on a July morning when the heat advisory was already in effect, when the sun was already cresting the ridge, when the mountain was already becoming what it becomes every summer afternoon, an oven with a view. They trusted each other and trusted their experience and trusted that the only way out was up. One of them still carries that morning in her body, in the specific shape of what she can and cannot hold onto. The other 3 are in the coroner's records, in the SAR reports, in the blank pages of the rescue box logbook that still waits at the halfway point for someone to open it and make a different choice. The last tram down runs at 9:45. The trail is still there, and the mountain, as always, is not waiting. In July 2023, a woman from suburban Ohio stepped out of an air-conditioned rental SUV at Badwater Basin, Death Valley, wearing open-toe sandals, carrying a single 16-ounce bottle of Dasani water, and immediately asked a park ranger where she could find the manager of the national park. The ground temperature that afternoon was 197 degrees Fahrenheit. Hot enough to cook an egg, hot enough to blister skin through a shoe sole. The ranger, a 26-year-old seasonal employee named Marcus Delgado, later told a reporter he stood there for a full 3 seconds blinking before he could form a response. Because there is no manager of Death Valley. There's only Death Valley, and Death Valley does not care about your complaints. Every year, roughly 1.2 million people visit this national park. It's the hottest place on Earth, a landscape so extreme it was literally named for the pioneers who died trying to cross it in 1849. And yet, every single summer, a specific breed of visitor arrives utterly convinced that the rules of thermodynamics are a suggestion, that the desert is merely an inconvenience, and that any discomfort they experience is someone else's fault. Park rangers have a name for the season when these visitors peak. They call it the stupid season. That's not my term, that's theirs. But here's what makes this genuinely fascinating and not just a collection of entitled tourist stories. Death Valley exposes something about human psychology that goes far deeper than entitlement. It reveals what happens when people who've spent their entire lives in controlled environments, climate-controlled homes, temperature-regulated offices, manicured suburban landscapes, suddenly encounter a place that cannot be controlled, a place that doesn't negotiate. And the collision between that expectation and that reality produces moments that are equal parts terrifying, absurd, and strangely revealing about who we are as a species. So what actually happens when someone who's never been told no by their environment walks into the most hostile landscape in North America? And why do some of these encounters end not with a funny story, but with a helicopter evacuation? Let's start with the numbers, because the numbers are staggering. Death Valley holds the world record for the highest reliably recorded air temperature, 134 degrees Fahrenheit, set on July 10, 1913. But air temperature is almost beside the point. Ground surface temperatures regularly exceed 200 degrees. In those conditions, the human body loses between 1 and 1.5 liters of sweat per hour. That means in a 3-hour hike, you can lose nearly a gallon of water through your skin alone. And most of that evaporates so fast in the dry air that you don't even realize you're sweating. Rangers call this invisible sweating. And it's one of the primary reasons people die here. They don't feel wet. They don't feel like they're in danger. They feel fine right up until the moment they don't. And that moment comes fast. Symptoms of severe dehydration can escalate from mild dizziness to full organ stress in under 30 minutes when the air itself is pulling moisture from your body faster than your brain can register the loss. The National Park Service recommends carrying 1 gallon of water per person per day for any activity in Death Valley during summer. 1 gallon. That's 128 ounces. The average tourist arrives with a single water bottle, sometimes 2, and then they want to hike. Consider the case of a family from Newport Beach, California, who visited in August of 2021. The mother, let's call her Linda, because the ranger who shared this story asked me not to use her real name, Linda arrived at the Mesquite Flat sand dunes at 11 in the morning with her husband, her 2 children aged 8 and 12, and a small cooler containing 4 juice boxes and a bag of baby carrots. She told the ranger at the trailhead that they planned to do the dunes and then find somewhere nice for lunch. The ranger explained that the sand surface temperature was approximately 170 degrees, that there was no shade for over a mile in any direction, and that the nearest restaurant was 67 miles away in Pahrump, Nevada. Linda's response, according to the ranger, was to ask if there was a Panera closer. This is funny. It's genuinely, absurdly funny. But here's where it stops being funny. Linda and her family walked onto those dunes anyway. 45 minutes later, her 8-year-old collapsed. Not from exhaustion. From first-degree burns on the soles of his feet, which had been cooking through his thin sneakers on sand hot enough to sear meat. The boy was airlifted to a hospital in Las Vegas. The helicopter evacuation cost over $37,000, and Linda filed a complaint. She wanted to know why there weren't signs warning about hot sand. There were signs. There were 7 of them between the parking lot and the dune field. This pattern repeats with such consistency that Death Valley Rangers have developed an informal taxonomy of the visitors most likely to end up in crisis. They don't use the word Karen, that's internet shorthand, but the profile they describe maps onto it with uncomfortable precision. The common thread isn't gender or age or income bracket. It's a specific relationship with discomfort. These are people who have optimized their lives to eliminate friction. Every surface is smooth, every temperature is regulated, every inconvenience has a customer service number attached. And when they arrive in a place where none of those systems exist, they don't adapt. They escalate. Ranger Abigail Torres, who spent 4 summers at Death Valley between 2018 and 2022, described it this way in an interview with Outside Magazine. They don't get angry at the heat, they get angry at us, like we chose to make it hot. like we're personally responsible for the sun. This is where the psychology gets genuinely interesting. There's a phenomenon in behavioral science called the just world hypothesis, the deeply held belief that the world is fundamentally fair and that outcomes are proportional to behavior. Good people get good outcomes. If you paid for a vacation, the vacation should be pleasant. If you drove 4 hours to see a national park, the national park owes you a good experience. When reality violates that expectation, the brain doesn't accept it. It looks for someone to blame: the ranger, the park service, the government, anyone but the 200-degree ground. Now here's where it gets genuinely dangerous, and this is the part most people never hear about. The entitlement doesn't just produce complaints, it produces decisions that kill people. In June of 2019, a couple from the Pacific Northwest decided to take a shortcut through an unmarked dirt road in Death Valley because their GPS showed it was 40 minutes faster than the paved route. A ranger had specifically told them not to take that road. The woman reportedly said, "We have four-wheel drive, we'll be fine." Their SUV got stuck in soft gravel 14 miles from the nearest paved road. Their cell phones had no signal. They had 2 liters of water between them. By the time a search team found them 19 hours later, both were in severe heat exhaustion, and the man's core body temperature was 104.7 degrees. Another 2 hours, and he likely would have been dead. The thing that haunts rangers isn't the heat. It's the confidence. It's the absolute unshakable certainty that nothing truly bad can happen to someone who drove here in a nice car and is staying at a hotel tonight. Marcus Delgado, the ranger from the opening of this story, put it bluntly: the desert doesn't know you have a reservation at the Furnace Creek Inn. And this connects to something even broader. We've built a civilization so effective at insulating us from natural consequences that millions of people have genuinely lost the ability to assess environmental risk. Think about that. For 200,000 years, humans survived precisely because they could read landscapes, gauge threats, sense when an environment was trying to kill them. That skill kept our ancestors alive on the African savanna. It guided migration patterns across continents. And in the span of roughly 2 generations, a significant portion of the developed world has lost it entirely. Not through any fault of their own, really, just through the sheer effectiveness of modern comfort. Death Valley strips that comfort away in minutes, and what's left underneath is revealing. Not everyone responds with entitlement, of course. Plenty of visitors arrive prepared, humble, and awed by the landscape. They carry the right gear, follow ranger advice, and leave with a profound respect for a place that predates human civilization by millions of years. But the ones who don't, the ones who show up in flip-flops with a single water bottle and a complaint ready, they've become so common that the Park Service has had to redesign its entire communication strategy around them. In 2022, Death Valley National Park began posting warnings on social media that read less like government advisories and more like the kind of thing you would text a friend who is about to do something catastrophically stupid. One post read, "It is not a dry heat at 128 degrees Fahrenheit. You can die here." Another, "Your car's GPS does not know this park. Do not trust it with your life." These posts went viral, shared millions of times, and the tone was deliberate. Traditional warnings weren't working, and polite language was being ignored. The Park Service realized they needed to match the bluntness of the threat with the bluntness of the message. I'm curious about something, and I mean this genuinely. Have you ever been in a situation where nature humbled you? Where you walked into an environment thinking you had it figured out, and the landscape just quietly proved you wrong? Drop that story in the comments. I'd actually love to hear those experiences because I think there's something valuable in admitting the moment the natural world made us feel very, very small. The irony is that Death Valley is one of the most beautiful places in North America. The salt flats at Badwater shimmer like fractured mirrors. The racetrack playa holds stones that slide across dry lake beds, leaving trails in the mud that scientists couldn't explain for decades. At night, the park is one of the darkest places in the country. The Milky Way stretches overhead in a band so dense, it looks like someone spilled milk across black velvet. Wildflowers bloom in spring in carpets of gold and purple that stretch to the horizon. It's a place of extraordinary, severe, uncompromising beauty, and it demands exactly one thing from its visitors: respect. That's really the core of it. Not preparation, though preparation matters. Not fitness, though fitness helps. Respect. The willingness to accept that you are a guest in a place that existed for 4 billion years before you arrived and will exist for billions more after you're gone. The willingness to read the signs, listen to the ranger, carry the water, wear the shoes, and accept that your comfort is not the landscape's priority. If this kind of story, the intersection of human behavior in extreme environments, the psychology behind why we make terrible decisions in beautiful places, resonates with you, consider subscribing. Not for me, for the community of people who find this stuff as endlessly fascinating as I do. There are a lot of us, and the conversations here are genuinely worth being part of. The Park Service reports that complaints have actually increased in recent years, even as visitation has held roughly steady. Rangers attribute this partly to social media. People arrive expecting the Instagram version of Death Valley, the golden hour photograph, the aesthetic desert experience. They don't expect the wind that sandblasts exposed skin, the headaches that start within 20 minutes of inadequate hydration, the disorientation that comes when every direction looks identical and the horizon wobbles in the heat like a mirage, which of course it literally is. What's the most entitled tourist behavior you've ever witnessed in a natural setting? I have a feeling some of you have stories that rival anything Death Valley Rangers have seen. Let me know in the comments. I read every single one, and the best stories might end up in a future video. And here's the thing that stays with me, the detail I keep coming back to. Marcus Delgado, the ranger who was asked where the manager of Death Valley was, he didn't laugh. He didn't roll his eyes. He walked that woman back to her car, handed her 2 bottles of water from his own supply, and spent 15 minutes explaining how to stay alive for the rest of her visit. Because that's what rangers do. They stand between human arrogance and natural consequence day after day in 130-degree heat, and they try to keep people alive despite themselves. The ground temperature the day that woman from Ohio stepped out in her open-toe sandals was 197 degrees. She wanted to speak to a manager. But Death Valley doesn't have one. It has rangers who carry extra water, scientists who study its extremes, and a landscape so ancient and so indifferent that every human story told within it, the funny ones, the frightening ones, the fatal ones, amounts to little more than a whisper across 4 billion years of silence. And the silence doesn't care if you're comfortable. It was here long before you arrived. It'll be here long after you leave. The only question is whether you'll be smart enough to leave at all.